I never thought much about Emily Shaw after high school. I had left my hometown years ago, moved across the country, and built a new life for myself. Silver Lake, our small town, the people from my past, it all faded into distant memories. But lately, something's been dragging me back, even though I haven't set foot in that place in over a decade. For the past week, I've been having dreams, vivid, unsettling dreams that pull me back to those old days. And every single one of them revolves around Emily Shaw, the girl who went missing when we were both in high school. I hadn't thought about her in years, but suddenly, every night, she's there, right in front of me. We're always at the same place, Silver Lake the last place I ever saw her. We used to fish there, just the two of us, watching the ripples in the water, talking about nothing and everything at the same time. It was peaceful back then. But now, in these dreams, something's off. The air feels heavy, and there's an unsettling silence, as if the lake is hiding a secret just beneath the surface. The dreams have been coming in fragments, starting off almost like memories. At first, it was simple, me and Emily standing by the water, our fishing rods in hand. She doesn't say much, just stares at the water with an expression I can't quite place. But as the nights go by, the dreams start getting darker, more intense. In last night's dream, the lake wasn't calm and serene like I remember it. The water was black, swirling in slow, menacing patterns. Emily stood on the edge of the dock, her back to me, staring down into the water. I called her name, but she didn't turn around. She didn't say anything. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding. It's been 10 years since Emily disappeared, and I've tried to bury the memories of that time. The whole town searched for her. Search parties scoured the woods and the lake, but no one ever found her. It was like she had just vanished, leaving no trace behind. And now, after all these years, she's showing up in my dreams. Why now? Why me? I wasn't particularly close to her. Sure, we went fishing together a few times, but that's all it was, two kids who happened to enjoy the quiet of the lake. I remember feeling devastated when she went missing, but it wasn't long before I left town and tried to forget everything about that place. But these dreams, they're too real. Too vivid. Every time I wake up, it feels like she's trying to tell me something, like there's something important that I'm missing. And the more I dream about her, the stronger the pull back to Silver Lake becomes. It's as if Emily's presence in my dreams is getting more desperate, more urgent, as if she's begging me to figure something out. I don't want to go back. I left that place behind for a reason, but I can't escape this feeling that Emily won't let me rest until I understand what happened to her. The strange thing is, every dream seems to progress, like I'm reliving the events leading up to the day she disappeared. It's as if each night is leading me closer to the truth, inch by inch. I don't know what's coming next, but I have this sinking feeling that the answers I've been avoiding for all these years are waiting for me at Silver Lake. And I'm not sure if I'm ready to face them. Last night, the dream took me back to the day it all happened. I hadn't thought about that day in years, but now it plays out in my mind like it was yesterday. Emily and I were at our usual spot on Silver Lake, just like we always were on weekends. The air was warm, the lake was calm, and everything seemed normal, at least at first. But the more I think about it, the more I realize something was off that day. In the dream, I'm sitting at the edge of the dock, just like I used to, with my fishing rod resting against my leg. I can feel the worn wood beneath me, the soft creak of the dock swaying with the gentle waves of the lake. Emily is next to me, her own fishing rod dangling lazily over the water. But she isn't focused on fishing. Not like she used to be. She's staring at the water, her eyes fixed on something I can't see. Her face is pale, almost blank, like she's somewhere far away, lost in her thoughts. It wasn't like her. Emily was always so lively, so full of energy, especially when we were out by the lake. But that day, she barely said a word. I remember asking her if something was wrong, but she just shrugged, her eyes never leaving the surface of the water. "It's nothing," she muttered, her voice flat. "Just thinking." But it wasn't just thinking. I could tell. She was distracted, distant, like she was listening for something, or maybe watching for something. I followed her gaze, trying to see what she was looking at, but all I saw were the usual ripples of the lake, the gentle swaying of the water as the breeze moved across it. Nothing unusual. In the dream, though, it feels different. The water seems darker, murkier. There's a heaviness in the air that I didn't notice back then, a weight pressing down on everything around us. The usual sounds of nature, birds chirping, leaves rustling, are muffled, distant. It's as if the lake itself is holding its breath, waiting. "Emily, are you sure you're okay?" I hear myself ask, the concern clear in my voice. She glances at me for the briefest moment, her eyes wide and dark, before quickly looking away. "I'm fine," she says again, but it's a lie. I can feel it. And then it happens. In the dream, just like that day, I hear the sound first, a faint splash, something breaking the surface of the water. Emily's head snaps toward the center of the lake, her entire body tensing. I follow her gaze, but again, I see nothing. Just water, still and quiet. But Emily, she's transfixed, her eyes wide with something between fear and fascination. Without warning, she stands up, dropping her fishing rod. She doesn't say a word, doesn't even glance at me as she walks to the edge of the dock, her steps slow and deliberate, like she's being pulled toward something. "Emily?" I call out, confused. "What are you doing?" But she doesn't answer. She's staring down into the lake now, as if something beneath the surface is calling to her, drawing her in. I stand up too, moving toward her, but the closer I get, the more wrong everything feels. The air is thicker, colder, and the water looks darker, like ink. There's something down there, I can feel it. And then, just like in real life, she's gone. 1 minute she's standing there, and the next, she's gone. No splash, no scream, just gone. I remember the panic that hit me, the way I called out her name over and over, running to the edge of the dock, looking for any sign of her in the water. But there was nothing. Just the still, black water staring back at me. In the dream, it's the same. I lean over the edge of the dock, my heart racing, my hands gripping the wood so tight it hurts. But the lake is empty. Silent. The weight of that moment crushes me, just like it did back then, as the realization sinks in, Emily is gone. And I have no idea what happened to her. I woke up in a cold sweat, the memory of her disappearance sharper than it's ever been. It's strange, after all these years, the details had blurred, but now they're crystal clear. The way she looked at the water, the fear in her eyes, the way she just vanished. It's like the dream is showing me something I missed, something I wasn't ready to see back then. And now I'm left wondering, what was down there, beneath the surface? What was Emily staring at, and why did she disappear without a trace? The more I dream, the more I feel like the lake itself is hiding something, something dark. And for the first time in years, I'm starting to think I need to go back. Back to Silver Lake. Back to where it all began. The dreams won't leave me alone. Every night, I find myself back at Silver Lake, watching Emily disappear again and again, the same scene playing out, but each time there's something new, a detail I missed, a feeling I ignored. It's like the lake itself is taunting me, forcing me to relive that day until I understand what really happened. But the more I dream, the less sure I am of anything. It's been 10 years since Emily vanished. 10 years since that perfect day turned into a nightmare I've never been able to wake up from. I left town not long after the search parties were called off, trying to put as much distance between me and Silver Lake as possible. But no matter how far I went, I couldn't outrun it. I've tried everything to push those memories down, moving to a new city, starting fresh, even blocking out the lake and that entire part of my past. But now, it's all coming back. And I can't stop thinking about what I could have done differently. I was there when it happened. I saw her. I was right next to her, but I didn't act fast enough. Maybe if I had pulled her back from the edge of the dock, if I had grabbed her arm, or if I had seen the signs earlier, she wouldn't have disappeared. Maybe if I had done something, anything, Emily would still be here. That guilt gnaws at me every day now. I keep replaying the moment in my mind, trying to understand why she was acting so strange. Why didn't I push harder when I noticed she wasn't herself? Why didn't I get help when I saw that haunted look in her eyes? I should have known something was wrong. But I didn't. I just stood there, clueless, watching her fade into the water without doing a damn thing. I can't stop thinking about her now. About how helpless she must have felt in those final moments. And I keep wondering if she's still out there somewhere, lost in the dark waters of Silver Lake, waiting for someone to find her. But there's something else that's been eating at me too, Ryan Shaw. Ryan was Emily's older brother. He had always been trouble, everybody knew that. He wasn't the type to follow the rules or blend in with the other kids at school. He had a temper, got into fights, and spent most of his time hanging around the wrong people. There were always rumors about him, about what he did behind closed doors, the things he got mixed up in. But no one ever really knew the truth. I remember seeing Ryan at the lake a few times. He never fished with us, he didn't seem like the type, but he would show up now and then, lurking around the edges of the forest, watching us from a distance. I never thought much of it back then. He was just a shadow, always in the background, always watching. But now, I can't stop wondering, what if Ryan had something to do with Emily's disappearance? What if he knows more than anyone realized? Shortly after Emily went missing, Ryan disappeared too. It was all very sudden. The town whispered that he had been sent away, shipped off to some facility for troubled kids. But no one ever confirmed it. It was just another rumor in a sea of rumors. One day he was there, and the next, he was gone, just like Emily. I can't shake the feeling that these two disappearances are connected, that Ryan knows what happened to his sister. Maybe that's why he left, maybe he couldn't face the guilt of whatever happened that day. Maybe he had been watching, just like I had, but from the shadows. Maybe he knows more than anyone else, more than I do. The more I think about it, the more obsessed I become. I can't stop researching, digging into the past, looking for any clue that might explain what happened to Emily. I've been searching online for any trace of Ryan, but it's like he's vanished off the face of the earth. There are no records, no social media, no news articles, nothing. The Shaw family was always secretive, and now it's like they've erased Ryan from existence. Every search leads me back to Silver Lake, back to that day. The more I dig, the more I feel like the lake is the key to everything, Emily, Ryan, all of it. And the more I dream, the more it feels like Emily is trying to show me something. Something I missed. Something I wasn't ready to see before. I don't know what's waiting for me if I go back to Silver Lake. But I can't keep running from it. I can't ignore the pull any longer. Whatever happened that day, whatever's been haunting me for the past 10 years, it's time to face it. I'm going back to the lake. The dream started like all the others. I was back at Silver Lake, standing on the dock, the familiar smell of damp earth and pine filling the air. The water was calm, still reflecting the twilight sky. I could hear the faint chirping of crickets in the distance, and for a moment, it almost felt peaceful, like the way things used to be. But then it changed. I saw Emily. She was standing by the edge of the lake, but she wasn't alone. Ryan was there too, and this time, it wasn't a hazy memory. It was crystal clear. They were facing each other, just a few feet apart, and something about the tension between them sent a chill down my spine. I could feel the anger radiating from Ryan, the kind of anger that could boil over at any moment. I moved closer, trying to get a better look, but as I stepped forward, my legs wouldn't move. I was frozen in place, watching from a distance as the scene unfolded. My heart raced, but I couldn't make a sound, couldn't call out to them, couldn't intervene. Ryan was furious. His face twisted with rage, his fists clenched at his sides. He was yelling, loud, angry words that I couldn't quite make out, but the tone was unmistakable. He was accusing her of something that had pushed him to the edge. His voice was sharp, cutting through the stillness of the lake like a knife. Emily was crying. I could see the tears streaming down her face, her shoulders shaking as she tried to calm him down. She looked terrified, and I could feel her fear as if it were my own. She was begging him to stop, pleading with him to listen, but he wasn't hearing her. He was too far gone, too consumed by whatever was fueling his anger. Then, it happened. In one swift movement, Ryan shoved Emily hard, sending her stumbling backward toward the water. I wanted to scream, to run to her, to stop what was about to happen, but I couldn't move. I was trapped, my feet glued to the ground, forced to watch helplessly. Emily's arms flailed as she tried to regain her balance, but it was too late. She fell into the lake with a sharp splash, disappearing beneath the surface in an instant. The water, which had been so calm just moments ago, churned violently where she'd gone under. For a few heart-stopping seconds, I waited for her to come back up, for her head to break the surface. But she didn't. Ryan stood there, his chest heaving with fury, his hands still clenched into fists. He didn't make a move to help her. He just stared at the spot where she'd fallen, his expression unreadable, as if he was trying to process what had just happened. I wanted to scream at him. To run at him, to do something, anything, to save her. But I couldn't. I was paralyzed, rooted to the dock, unable to move or speak. I felt utterly powerless, like I was trapped inside my own mind, watching a nightmare play out in slow motion. Seconds ticked by, but Emily never resurfaced. The ripples in the water began to fade, and the lake grew still again, eerily silent. Ryan finally turned and walked away, his footsteps heavy and deliberate, leaving the lake and his sister behind without a second glance. I tried to fight against the invisible force holding me in place, tried to make my body respond, but it was no use. I was stuck there, frozen in that terrible moment, the silence of the lake deafening in my ears. The guilt and panic swelled in my chest until it felt like I couldn't breathe. And then I woke up. I bolted upright in bed, gasping for air, my heart pounding in my chest. Sweat clung to my skin, and for a moment, I didn't know where I was. The room was dark, but the image of the lake, of Ryan's rage and Emily's fall, burned behind my eyes. I could still hear the splash, still see her hands reaching out as she went under, still feel the weight of my own helplessness. It was just a dream, I told myself. It wasn't real. But it didn't feel like just a dream. It felt like something more, like a memory I'd forgotten or a secret the lake had kept hidden from me all these years. What if this wasn't just my mind playing tricks on me? What if this is what really happened to Emily? The thought sent a shiver down my spine. Could Ryan have been responsible for her disappearance? Could I have witnessed the truth, buried deep in my subconscious, all this time without realizing it? I sat there in the dark for what felt like hours, unable to shake the image of Emily slipping beneath the water. I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something had happened at Silver Lake, something darker than I'd ever imagined. And now I had to know the truth. I needed to find out what really happened to Emily. Even if it meant going back to the place I swore I'd never return. The dream haunted me. I couldn't get the image of Emily falling into the water out of my mind, her brother's rage, the helplessness I felt as I watched her disappear beneath the surface. No matter how many times I tried to tell myself it was just a dream, that it wasn't real, something inside me wouldn't let it go. It felt too real, too vivid. There had to be more to the story than I'd ever known. I couldn't stop thinking about Ryan Shaw. His presence in the dream had been so intense, so full of anger, and the way he'd just walked away from Emily without even trying to help her, it didn't sit right with me. And then there was the other detail, the one I hadn't thought about until now. Ryan disappeared not long after Emily did. It was almost as if he had vanished, just like she had. But the official story was that Ryan had been sent away to a psychiatric facility. That was the explanation the town accepted, the reason people stopped asking questions. But something didn't add up. The more I thought about it, the stranger it seemed. Why would Ryan disappear right after Emily? And why had I never questioned it before? Maybe I had been too wrapped up in my own guilt, too eager to put everything behind me, but now, the pieces didn't fit. I had to know the truth. I spent the next few days digging into the Shaw family. It wasn't easy. The Shaws were wealthy, well-connected, and had always kept a low profile in town. But I knew where to start. I focused on Ryan, trying to find any trace of him after Emily's disappearance. Old news articles, social media, town records, I searched everything I could find, but it was like Ryan had been wiped off the face of the earth. No posts, no updates, nothing. Just a vague mention of him being sent to a mental facility, but no further details. It wasn't enough. I needed to know where Ryan had gone. That's when I stumbled across an old news interview with Mrs. Shaw, Emily, and Ryan's mother. It was a short segment from right after Emily disappeared. She was tearfully pleading for anyone with information to come forward, but what caught my attention was a brief mention of Ryan's absence. She said something about him being in a psychiatric hospital, getting the help he needs. It was vague, rehearsed even. And that was it. No mention of where he was, how long he'd be there, or why he'd been sent away in the first place. It felt too convenient. The timing, the disappearance, the silence, it all felt like a cover-up. So, I took a chance. I called every psychiatric facility in the state, looking for any record of Ryan Shaw. I knew it was a long shot, but I had to try. Most places wouldn't tell me anything, citing patient confidentiality. But after a full day of calls and emails, I finally got through to someone, a woman at a small facility in Pennsylvania, the one Mrs. Shaw had vaguely mentioned in her interview. "I'm sorry, but we have no record of a Ryan Shaw ever being admitted here," the woman on the other end of the line said, her voice polite but firm. "No record at all?" I asked, feeling the tension in my chest tighten. "Nothing from 10 years ago?" "No, nothing," she confirmed. "I've checked our files. There's no one by that name who's ever been a patient here." I hung up the phone, my heart racing. Ryan had never been there. The story the Shaws had fed the town, the story about Ryan being sent away for mental health treatment, it was a lie. He hadn't gone to a psychiatric hospital. He hadn't gone anywhere, at least not officially. That could only mean one thing: the Shaws were hiding something. And whatever it was big enough for them to lie to the entire town. The realization hit me like a wave. They were covering up the truth, about Ryan, about Emily, about everything. What had really happened the day Emily disappeared? Had Ryan done something to her? Had their family known all along? And if Ryan hadn't been sent away, then where was he now? The more I thought about it, the more I realized how deep this went. The Shaws were powerful, and they had the means to bury secrets. But I wasn't going to let it go. I couldn't. I owed it to Emily to find out the truth, even if it meant digging into things that people wanted to stay buried. That night, the dreams came again, more vivid than ever. This time, Ryan's face was clearer, his rage more pronounced. I could feel his anger radiating off him, feel the tension between him and Emily. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding, but one thing was clear: I was closer to the truth. I just had to keep pushing. I wasn't going to let this go. Not now. I needed to know what happened to Emily, and I had a feeling the lake wasn't done with me yet. The dreams were getting worse. Each night, they grew more vivid, more real, to the point where I couldn't tell if I was asleep or awake. Every time I closed my eyes, I was pulled back to Silver Lake, back to that day, but the images were sharper now, the details clearer. It was as though the lake itself was calling me, pulling me toward something I had long tried to forget. This time, the dream didn't start on the dock. I was in the woods, standing among the tall pines that lined the edge of the lake, the branches swaying slightly in the breeze. The air was thick, heavy with moisture, and the ground beneath my feet was soft and damp. I could hear the faint sound of water lapping against the shore in the distance, but something else caught my attention. A rustling, the sound of someone moving through the trees, fast and frantic. It was Emily. She was running, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps as she sprinted through the forest. I could see her ahead of me, her hair flying behind her, her feet barely touching the ground as she navigated the twisting paths. She wasn't running toward something, she was running from something. I tried to follow her, my legs moving on their own, but no matter how fast I ran, she was always just out of reach, slipping through the trees like a shadow. I wanted to call out to her, to tell her to stop, but the words wouldn't come. I was silent, helpless, trapped in the dream. As I ran, I started to feel it, the pull. It was subtle at first, a slight tug in the pit of my stomach, but it grew stronger with every step I took. It was as if the lake itself was drawing me in, pulling me toward it like a magnet. The closer I got to the water, the more intense the feeling became, until it was all I could focus on. I followed Emily through the forest, my heart pounding in my chest, the trees blurring around me. The ground sloped upward, the path narrowing, and I realized where she was heading. The cliff. The one that overlooked Silver Lake, the one we used to hike to when we were younger. Emily burst into the clearing ahead of me, her body tense, her eyes wide with fear. She stopped at the edge of the cliff, the drop-off just a few feet away. The lake stretched out below her, dark and still, reflecting the overcast sky. For a moment, she just stood there, frozen, her chest rising and falling with each breath, as if she was trying to decide what to do next. That's when I saw him. Ryan was there, standing at the edge of the clearing, watching her. He looked different this time, more disheveled, more unhinged. His eyes were wild, his hair matted, and there was a look in his face that I couldn't quite place. Anger, yes, but also something deeper. Desperation, maybe. Regret. He took a step toward Emily, his hands clenched into fists, and she flinched. I could see the terror in her eyes, the way her whole body trembled as he got closer. She was trapped. The cliff behind her, Ryan in front of her. There was nowhere for her to go. I tried to move, tried to reach her, but again, I was stuck. My feet wouldn't move, and my voice was gone. I could only watch as Ryan closed the distance between them, his face twisted with rage. He was yelling at her, his words sharp and biting, but I couldn't hear them. It was like I was underwater, the sounds muffled and distorted. Emily shook her head, backing up until her heels were right at the edge of the cliff. Her eyes flicked toward the lake, then back to Ryan. She was pleading with him, her hands raised in a gesture of surrender, but he wasn't listening. He was too far gone. Then, without warning, Ryan lunged at her. Emily screamed, her voice echoing through the forest, and for a moment, time seemed to slow. I watched in horror as she lost her balance, her arms flailing as she teetered on the edge. She tried to grab onto something, anything, but there was nothing there. Just air. And then she was gone. She fell from the cliff, disappearing into the dark water below with a splash that reverberated through the silence. I stood there, frozen, my heart hammering in my chest, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Ryan stood at the edge, staring down into the water, his chest rising and falling with each ragged breath. For a moment, he looked like he was about to jump in after her, but then he just turned and walked away. I wanted to scream, to chase after him, to dive into the water and save her, but I couldn't. My body wouldn't respond, and the pull of the lake was stronger than ever, dragging me toward the edge, toward the dark water below. And then I woke up. My heart was pounding, my sheets soaked with sweat. I sat up, gasping for air, the image of Emily's fall burned into my mind. It was too real, too vivid. This wasn't just a dream. It was a memory, or something more. The lake was calling me, just like it had called her. I knew, without a doubt, that I had to go back. I had to return to Silver Lake, to the place where it all began. Whatever happened to Emily, whatever secret the lake was hiding, I had to face it. I couldn't run from it anymore. The dreams had been leading up to this. Every night, they grew darker, more intense, and I could feel myself getting closer to the truth, but I wasn't ready for what came next. This dream was different, more vivid, more real, and when I woke up, I knew this was the final piece of the puzzle. It started like the others. I was back at Silver Lake, but this time, I wasn't on the dock or in the woods. I was at a part of the lake I barely remembered, a secret spot hidden by tall reeds and dense trees. Emily had mentioned it once, years ago, saying it was her place to escape. I'd never been there before, but in the dream, it was as familiar as any place I'd ever known. I could see them both, Emily and Ryan, standing by the water's edge. The moon was high in the sky, casting long shadows over the lake, and the air was thick with tension. Emily looked small, fragile, her arms wrapped around herself as if she was trying to hold everything together. Ryan, on the other hand, was pacing, his body tight with anger, his fists clenched at his sides. "You told them, didn't you?" Ryan's voice cut through the stillness of the night, sharp and accusing. "You told Mom and Dad where I was. You betrayed me." Emily shook her head, her voice trembling as she tried to explain. "Ryan, I didn't. I was worried. You hadn't called me in days, and I didn't know if you were okay. I didn't mean to." "Liar." Ryan's voice exploded, his face twisted with rage. He stepped closer, his eyes wild and full of fury. "You're just like them. You wanted them to send me away. You never wanted me to get out of this place." I stood there, watching, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew what was coming. I could feel it in the air, the way everything seemed to close in around them. But no matter how much I wanted to move, to stop what was about to happen, I couldn't. I was frozen, trapped in place, helpless. "I didn't want that, Ryan," Emily pleaded, her voice breaking. "I swear, I just wanted to help you." "Help me?" Ryan sneered, his face inches from hers now. "You think turning me in is helping me?" Emily took a step back, but Ryan grabbed her arm, yanking her toward him with enough force to make her stumble. "You're no better than the rest of them," he growled, his grip tightening. "You think you're so perfect, always the good daughter, always doing what they want. But you're not. You're just a scared little girl." I wanted to scream, to run to her, but my body refused to move. I watched in horror as Ryan's rage boiled over, his hand still gripping Emily's arm as he raised his other fist. Emily tried to pull away, her eyes wide with fear, but she was no match for him. He hit her, hard, his fist slamming into her cheek with a sickening thud. Emily fell to the ground, her body crumpling like a rag doll. She didn't even have time to scream. I could see the blood trickling from the corner of her mouth, her body shaking as she tried to crawl away from him. But Ryan wasn't done. He stood over her, his chest heaving, his face a mask of pure hatred. He kicked her, again and again, the sound of his foot connecting with her body echoing in the stillness of the night. Emily curled into herself, trying to protect her face, but it was no use. Ryan was relentless. I was screaming now, at least, I thought I was. My mouth was open, my throat burning, but no sound came out. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't help her. I could only watch as Ryan's rage consumed him, as Emily's body grew still, her blood soaking into the dirt by the water's edge. Finally, Ryan stopped, his breath ragged, his hands trembling. He looked down at Emily's unconscious body, his expression shifting from anger to something else, regret, maybe. For a moment, he just stood there, staring at her, his chest rising and falling with each labored breath. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the trees. I wanted to run to Emily, to see if she was still alive, but my feet wouldn't move. I was trapped, forced to watch as her body lay there by the water, motionless. The moonlight glinted off the lake, casting an eerie glow over the scene, and all I could do was stand there, helpless and horrified. And then I woke up. I shot up in bed, gasping for air, my heart pounding in my chest. The image of Emily, broken and bleeding by the lake, was burned into my mind. I could still hear Ryan's voice, his accusations ringing in my ears. The dream had been so real, so vivid, that for a moment, I wasn't sure if it was just a dream or a memory I'd repressed. Had this really happened? Had Ryan attacked Emily in a fit of rage, leaving her to die by the water's edge? And if he had, why hadn't anyone found her? Why hadn't I remembered this before? The weight of it all pressed down on me, suffocating me. I knew, deep down, that the dream wasn't just a nightmare. It was the truth. Ryan had done something terrible, and the lake had been keeping that secret for years. But now, it was all coming to the surface. The dream started like any other. I found myself standing by Silver Lake again, the air thick with that familiar weight. But something was different this time. I wasn't just watching the events unfold like before. I wasn't standing on the dock, or in the woods, or hidden in the background. I was inside the moment, living it. I looked down at my hands, but they weren't my hands. They were smaller, more delicate. And they were trembling. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I wasn't me anymore. I was Emily. For a moment, everything spun. My vision blurred, and my heart pounded in my chest as panic set in. I didn't know how I'd gotten here, or why I was trapped inside her body, feeling everything she felt. All I knew was that something was terribly wrong. Her fear coursed through me like a current, and I couldn't escape it. Suddenly, I wasn't at the lake anymore. The scene shifted around me, and I was sitting at a desk, staring down at a textbook. I recognized the room immediately. It was one of the classrooms in our high school. The smell of chalk and old books filled the air, and the low murmur of students talking drifted through the room. I tried to focus, but my mind felt heavy, clouded. I could feel bruises on my skin, on her skin, the dull ache of pain that throbbed with every movement. I looked down and saw them, dark patches on my arms, my wrists. A quick glance in the small mirror I kept in my bag showed a face with sunken eyes, a swollen cheek, and a split lip. My reflection stared back at me, but it was Emily's face. I was trapped in her body, feeling her pain. The fear was overwhelming. It wasn't just the physical pain, it was the suffocating dread that hung over everything. Emily knew something was coming. She could feel it, and now, so could I. I looked around the classroom, trying to ground myself, but the world felt hazy, unreal. Faces blurred in and out of focus, voices became muffled whispers. It was like being underwater, cut off from everything but the pounding in my head and the ache in my chest. Then the door opened. I could hear the soft creak of the hinges, followed by the heavy footsteps of someone walking into the room. Every head turned, the quiet buzz of conversation stopping abruptly. I turned too, my stomach twisting in knots. A police officer stood at the front of the classroom. His face was expressionless, his eyes scanning the room before they settled on me, on Emily. "Emily Shaw," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "We need you to come with us." The words hit like a sledgehammer, and I felt Emily's fear spike. I stood up slowly, my legs shaking beneath me, the bruises on my arms screaming with pain. The room seemed to close in around me, the walls pressing down as I followed the officer out the door. I didn't want to go, but I couldn't stop myself. My body wasn't my own. I was just a passenger, trapped inside her skin, forced to experience her fear, her confusion, her dread. The hallway outside the classroom was long and empty, and each step felt heavier than the last. My mind raced, 1,000 thoughts tumbling over each other, but I couldn't make sense of any of them. Why were they taking her, me? What did they know? What had happened? The officer led me to the front of the school, where another officer was waiting by a police car. They didn't say much, just motioned for me to get inside. I could feel Emily's heart hammering in her chest, her breath shallow and quick. The panic was suffocating. As I sat in the back seat of the car, the weight of everything pressed down on me like a heavy blanket. Emily was terrified, confused, trapped. She didn't know what was happening or why, and now, neither did I. The car started moving, the engine's low hum vibrating through the seat. I could feel every bump in the road, every turn, but it was like I wasn't really there. The world outside the window blurred, and my vision started to fade. It was as if I was being pulled away, dragged out of her body, out of her mind. But before the dream ended, before I woke up, I heard her voice. It wasn't loud, just a whisper at the edge of my consciousness, but it was enough to send a chill down my spine. "I didn't mean to betray you," she said, her voice shaky, desperate. "I was only trying to help." Then everything went dark. I jolted awake, gasping for air, my heart racing. The weight of Emily's fear still clung to me, heavy and oppressive, and I could feel the bruises on my own skin, even though they weren't really there. I wasn't sure what was real anymore. I wasn't sure if I'd just experienced a dream or a memory. All I knew was that I had been trapped inside Emily's life, feeling her pain, her confusion, her terror. And now, I had to face the truth. The dreams had been building up to this. I could feel it the moment I closed my eyes. There was a heaviness in the air, a sense of finality, as if I was about to see the one thing that had been hidden from me all these years. The dream started the way so many of them had, with the lake, dark and still, stretching out beneath a heavy sky. But this time, there was no confusion, no subtle hints. This time, I knew what was coming. I was standing near the bleachers by the lake, a place I hadn't thought about in years. The old wooden structure was half rotted, the boards creaking under the weight of the years that had passed. It was secluded, hidden from view by a cluster of trees. The kind of place no one went anymore. And that's where I saw them, Ryan and Emily. Emily was lying on the ground, motionless, her body crumpled and limp. Her hair was matted with dirt, and her face was pale, almost ghostly in the dim light. My heart lurched in my chest when I realized she was dead. Ryan was standing over her, his face twisted in a mixture of anger and desperation. His hands were trembling as he grabbed her by the arms and began to drag her body toward the bleachers. Every movement was labored, and I could see the strain on his face, the sweat glistening on his forehead. He wasn't just angry anymore, he was broken. Whatever rage had driven him to this moment had now left him hollow. I wanted to scream, to run to Emily, to stop what was happening, but I couldn't move. My feet were rooted to the ground, my body frozen, just like in all the other dreams. I could only watch as Ryan pulled her lifeless body into the shadows beneath the bleachers. His hands shook as he began to dig, scooping up the dirt with his bare hands. The earth was soft, damp from the recent rain, and it clung to his fingers as he worked. The sound of his labored breathing filled the air, punctuated by the dull thud of his hands hitting the ground. It was frantic, desperate. He wasn't careful, he wasn't trying to hide what he'd done in some clever way. He was just trying to make it all disappear. I watched as he dragged Emily's body into the shallow hole he'd made, his breath ragged, his eyes wide and unfocused. He paused for a moment, staring down at her, as if he was finally realizing the horror of what he had done. I could see it on his face, the regret, the disbelief, the raw panic that comes when you know there's no going back. But even in that moment, even with his hands shaking and his chest heaving with the weight of his actions, he didn't stop. He began to cover her with dirt, each handful trembling more than the last. The dirt fell slowly, clumps landing on Emily's body with a sickening thud. The earth swallowed her, inch by inch, until all that was left was a mound of freshly turned soil. Ryan sat back on his heels, his hands covered in dirt, his breath coming in short gasps. He looked broken, destroyed by the weight of what he had done. But he didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just sat there in the shadows, his body trembling, staring at the spot where he'd buried his sister. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to run to the spot, to dig her out, to do something, anything. But I couldn't. I was frozen, stuck in place, forced to watch as Ryan stood up, his legs unsteady, and walked away from the bleachers, leaving Emily behind. The silence was unbearable. The lake, the trees, the world around me, it all seemed to hold its breath as Ryan disappeared into the darkness. I could still see the mound of dirt beneath the bleachers, the secret that had been hidden there for all these years. This was it. This was where she had been all along. Right here, under our feet, and no one had known. Suddenly, I was pulled back into my own body. The dream ended so abruptly, I shot upright in bed, gasping for air. My heart was pounding, my skin slick with sweat. I could still feel the weight of the dream, the horror of what I had just witnessed. Emily had been buried under the bleachers at Silver Lake. That's where she had been all this time. My mind raced, trying to process what I had seen. It couldn't just be a dream. It was too real, too vivid. This was the truth. I knew it in my bones. Ryan had killed her, and he had buried her there, thinking no one would ever find out. But now, I knew. I had seen it. I sat there, my hands shaking, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I couldn't stop seeing her body, lifeless, disappearing beneath the earth. I couldn't stop hearing the sound of Ryan's hands digging frantically in the dirt. I knew what I had to do. I had to go back to Silver Lake. I had to tell someone. Emily was still there, waiting to be found. I sat in my bed for what felt like hours, replaying the dream over and over in my mind. The weight of it was crushing, a mixture of disbelief and horror settling deep in my chest. I couldn't shake the image of Ryan burying Emily beneath the bleachers, his hands shaking, his face a mask of fear and regret. It felt so real, too real to just be a dream. I knew, deep down, that it was more than that. It was the truth. Emily had been buried there for years, and no one had known. All the while, people fished at Silver Lake, played soccer on the fields, and sat on those same bleachers, completely unaware that her body was hidden just a few feet beneath the ground. I couldn't let it stay that way. She deserved to be found. She deserved justice. But what could I do? How could I explain what I knew? I couldn't tell the police I had dreamed of where Emily was buried. They'd think I was crazy, maybe even suspect me of something worse. I was just a guy haunted by his past, by the disappearance of someone he barely knew. Who would believe me? As the minutes ticked by, I realized I didn't have a choice. I had to do something, even if it meant I couldn't be involved. I couldn't let the truth stay buried. I reached for my phone, my hand still trembling, and quickly searched for the number of the local police department in my old hometown. The town I hadn't returned to in years. When I dialed the number, I made sure to block my caller ID. No one could know it was me. I wasn't ready for that kind of scrutiny, the questions, the doubt. I just needed to tell them what I knew, and then let them take it from there. The phone rang only once before a gruff voice answered, "County Sheriff's Office, how can I help you?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. "I have information about a missing person. Someone from years ago. Emily Shaw." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Emily Shaw? You mean the girl who disappeared from Silver Lake?" "Yes," I said, my throat tightening. "I know where she is. I know where her body is." Another pause, longer this time. I could almost hear the disbelief in his silence. "What exactly are you saying?" I swallowed hard, my heart pounding. "She's buried under the bleachers near Silver Lake. You'll find her there." My voice cracked slightly, but I didn't wait for a response. I hung up the phone before the officer could ask more questions. My hands were still shaking as I set the phone down on the nightstand. It was done. I had told them. The next few days passed in a blur. I kept checking the news, scanning the headlines for any mention of Emily, any indication that the police had followed up on my tip. I wasn't sure if they would take it seriously. After all, it was just an anonymous call. But deep down, I knew they would check. They had to. If they did, they'd find her. It was 3 days later when the news broke. I was sitting in my small apartment, scrolling mindlessly through my phone, when the notification popped up. My heart stopped when I saw the headline. "Remains found at Silver Lake, believed to be missing teen Emily Shaw." I clicked on the article, my hands trembling, the screen blurring as I read the details. It was all there. The police had searched the area beneath the old bleachers, just as I had said, and they had found human remains buried in the dirt. The remains were badly decomposed, but initial reports suggested they belonged to Emily Shaw. They were running DNA tests to confirm, but I didn't need to wait for the results. I already knew it was her. The article didn't mention how the police had come to search that specific location, but I knew it was because of me. Because of the dreams. Because of whatever strange, supernatural connection had tied me to Emily all these years. I stared at the screen, my mind reeling. I had wanted to know the truth for so long, and now that I did, I wasn't sure what to do with it. The weight of it pressed down on me, heavier than I could have imagined. Emily had been so close, buried beneath the very spot where we had spent so much time. And now, she was finally going to be found. Her family would have closure, the town would know what happened, but the truth came with a cost. What did this mean for me? Why had I been the one to see it, to feel it? I had barely known her, yet she had chosen me, or maybe the lake had chosen me, to uncover the truth. The sense of guilt I carried for years felt both heavier and lighter now. I couldn't save her, couldn't stop what had happened, but I had found her in the end. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was all I could do. As I sat there, staring at the screen, a strange calm settled over me. The dreams had stopped. The lake was silent now, its secrets finally revealed. Emily's story was over, but mine wasn't. I still didn't understand everything, but maybe I didn't need to. All I knew was that Emily had finally been found. And the truth, as dark and twisted as it was, had come to light. I let out a long breath and closed my eyes, hoping for the first time in years that when I slept, the dreams wouldn't follow me.